Hi, so today I wanted to discuss about Bromberg's idea of dissociation and how it plays out in real life as well as therapeutic relationship. Now, Bromberg shares that it is important to understand that dissociation is something which does not only unfold in day-to-day life of a human being, but it is also something which enters the therapy room and gets enacted and become a part of the therapeutic relationship where the therapist is also dissociating certain parts of herself in response to the patient's experiences of pain and fear with respect to traumatic memories. But first of all, we need to understand what is dissociation. Bromberg shares that whenever there is a traumatic memory of abuse or something happens which really shakes up the child, and the child goes to a significant other, whether it be a parent or anybody, and they say that this nothing much has happened, and the child's experience gets invalidated or does not get that sort of listening here which is required in response, then what the mind of the child does is these traumatic memories which have so shaken up the patient, or the child in this case, are the mind keeps these destabilizing experiences aside and forms a continuity which does not threaten or bring to the surface these painful experiences over and over again, and the child is able to operate into the world. However, Bromberg says that even though cognitively those experiences have gotten down or have been forgotten, but the emotional, the affective impact of these experiences are always in the foreground, are always being felt by the patient, by the child, and it becomes like an affective ghost, a lingering ghost which does not get discussed or brought up into the therapy room. Now, while working with this patient, this bulimic patient, Bromberg shares that this patient had very adamantly said that whatever Bromberg says or does, she is not going to spill the beans because the as as much as painful experiences got discussed, her pain also started coming at the forefront. And with that, Bromberg also started feeling a lot of shame because he really wanted to know what had happened with this patient, and his shame was about subjecting this patient to this pain just because of his curiosity of wanting to know what had happened. Now, in frequent sessions, brings this up in front of the patient and shares how he had been feeling, and patient also breaks down and says that she had also been feeling incredibly furious at the therapist for leaving her all alone with her painful experiences. And Bromberg discovers that beneath all this adamant sharing that she's not gonna spill the beans was also a longing to share with someone what had actually happened with her. But that longing got shrouded in their feelings of shame. Now, Bromberg goes deeper and build on this theoretically about this feeling of shame. He says that sharing with someone about what has happened with her is a healthy part of us which wants to tell someone that what has unfolded. However, when the environment ends up dismissing these significant experiences, the child really starts doubting whether what had happened was actually real, whether what had happened with her is actually significant enough which should be shared with someone. And now, due to this invalidation, the child starts doubting not just the experience, but also herself as a person, also her mind as a person. and the parts which know that what has happened to her was a real experiences are also kept at bay. Now the shame is first about getting invalidated for what the child has felt something to be so real and painful, and the shame is also about really wanting someone to believe what had actually happened, and since and also not to lose ties, not to lose the attachment ties, because the child also wants care. No matter how much they had been abused, they would always trust the closed one, no matter how much they had been neglected, no matter how much they had been punished. Now the child also feels scared. Now the child really wants to come out, share something, but she is also ashamed that she will end up losing the emotional ties from these significant people whom she had protected so much by telling herself these lies. And Bromberg shares that now the patient's life in itself starts feeling like a secret, which ends up getting isolated, completely shrouded. However, it is really important that these parts which have been left off, which are not being discussed, are brought out into the picture, eh, are told to someone who can think through them, and instead of being uh, pushed into secrecy, they are brought into this sphere of mutuality with the therapist, where the patient is experiencing her mind being carried by someone else's mind, being carried in someone else's mind, which is therapist, and there is no more dissociation happening of those parts. Someone is there, someone is listening, someone is giving them safe space to unfold, and finally, she is finding a way to come out of this secrecy which she had been forced to carry in her childhood. And Bromberg says that if he had not brought to the forefront of the patient that how this is how he had been feeling about this shame of wanting to know, it would have been difficult for the therapist as well as the patient to know what is actually going on. Here, the patient is completely resistant, and here the therapist is sitting with wanting to know, but nobody is actually saying what is actually going on into this therapeutic relationship. Now, so when the therapist brings forth this dissociated part where he is feeling ashamed of wanting to know, the patient brings forward her dissociated parts where she wants to tell about what has actually happened to her. And the heart cannot forget until and unless it thinks about what has actually unfolded. So these unthinkable experiences, these disorganizing experiences are finally something which mind doesn't have to take the pressure of putting them at bay, but the mind can finally integrate them and live a life of continuity, which is not based on repressing something. Thank you.